Call to order, and we'll do pledge of allegiance, and as usual, the flag is behind, oh, there's one here. They put me one, all right. The flag's right here. So, go ahead. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, and roll call. Don, Bert Caldwell.
Ryan Thompson.
We are, Shelley is not here, and Callie said she was gonna be, but she's late. We had a copy of the minutes from October the 8th go out, and I'm assuming everybody had a chance to read it. Any changes or notes or thoughts? Nope.
Not for me.
I would entertain a motion to accept them.
I move that we accept them.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And that passed. And the agenda we have in front of us that I think is correct. And I would take a motion to accept that.
So
Just have a question.
Yes, sir.
Is the meeting on the 12th on a Wednesday?
No.
It's on the 10th, isn't it?
Yeah, it's that was a good catch. And you're right, it is the 10th, so.
she's stuck in.
And Callie's here.
Hello, I'm here.
Okay, we'll make that change, and I would accept a motion to accept
That would be
the,
the 10th then?
yes, 10th of December. I would take a motion to accept the amended agenda.
So
And a second?
second.
Moved and seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any comment, public comment of items not on the agenda, and recognizing our Commissioner, Ms. Jean Curtis. Thanks for attending tonight.
You bet. First, I want to remind you all, either turn your ballot in or go vote tomorrow. So I've told Bert at lunch today, because we have to do the same lunch, that I invited myself to all the community council meetings before the end of the year, just to say thanks to folks and remind them of things that we've worked on the last 18 years. Of course, your area is easy to recoup, remember all the things that we've done. We've cleaned up the sediments behind the Milltown Dam. We have a new state park. Established the Spawner Community Council, or Milltown Community Council. We have a TED in the west log yard where Harris Manufacturing is, with potential for a future industrial complex. Of course, we have a TIF over here on the Bonner Mill site, and there's been a lot of redevelopment there with jobs, beer, and music. Good combination. Not all at the same time, I hope. The paving of Tamarack and Juniper down to the Milltown Dam site will take place in the spring. The state and the county have got that worked out. We just got the last legal people having to sign things.
Question on that, who's going to end up owning Tamarack Juniper? Is that going to be a county road or a state road?
It's really a state road.
Okay, because I know I
But the
got into
county-
a confusion on that one a while back.
Yeah, so it was all part of the interstate project that the state took roads that were county before, and it's been a long, complicated thing.
Right, okay, thank you.
The Missoula Rural Fire Station is going to be moving, I understand, next year. There's of course, a continued need in your community for some sort of solution for wastewater in the future, and you guys have had interesting meetings about that. In the East Missoula area, we've also established a community council there, done some corridor studies on access and safety and pedestrian crosswalks. They have a welcome to East Missoula sign, if you haven't seen it, they finally got that up. That took a long time because for a while the state would let us have signs. In fact, it's mostly on private property. there is a community interest there in zoning and safety and that underpass improvement and a need for multimodal safety improvements, which of course we'd like to connect all the way through. The other thing we've got here is quite a few trails that were part of the whole project. If we could just get that connection on to East Missoula, convincing the state that there's a need. They know there's a need. There's a skinny spot. So right now, as you know, they're taking comment on the improvements right around the corner there at where you go up to the old ski area. So they hopefully they'll figure that out. So, yeah.
I'm sorry, I missed that. Is there an opportunity for comment on the overhaul at that, at Marshall Bay? Is that?
So the work that they're doing on there, they need to stabilize the river this spring ate away at stuff. So yeah.
So they're taking comment on that?
They are taking comment.
Or did not?
I don't know when it closed. I can let you know.
No, that'd be good to look up.
Yeah. In the Potomac area, some of you might remember how scary it used to be to try to turn into Johns Road. And we worked with the highway department and figured out how to put a turn lane in there. That was because people that lived in that area said it was dangerous. There's a couple new fire stations since I've been on the job. Not that I did them, but I'm always glad to help. We worked with the school on the playground there. And for any of you who have been up that way lately, there's been an amazing cleanup at mile marker 13, if you haven't noticed. Make sure you slow down and look. So that was a big project. The county had some money that we put into it that was left over from the auction at Smurfett Stone. And we set it aside for cleanup because that's what we were after Smurfett Stone for. And then a few anonymous donors contributed to that project, and there were, I think it was 160 tons of garbage taken out and 20 tons of recycling or something. It's a nice, very improved site. It's not perfect, but it's very improved. Of course, there's been agricultural and wildlife habitat has been conserved on several ranches in that area. The Greeno area, we worked with PASA to get their projects up to code. At first, they were kind of doing things in the dark at night. So I'm just going through by areas of the county. We worked with the EBRL to get their old cabins up to code, so they've been there a long time, but things didn't necessarily, in the old days, you just put things up and did them how you could, so they wanted to bring their whole place up to code. It's a guest ranch. We've worked with the Forest Service and now with TNC on the old Plum Creek land for future uses. Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, Weeds, and others have worked on that Clearwater watercraft inspection station. As you know, there's a big focus on keeping the aquatics invasives out of the Columbia River Basin, and we're at the head of that. And of course, we don't want all the lakes up through the chain of lakes to be invaded with mussels. We worked with landowners at the Cozy Corner area, so if you don't know where that is, when you go to Salmon Lake, you can turn and go through and come out over by Ovando, call that Cozy Corner. Those folks wanted to conserve their land, but put a lot of conservation easements on it, and they've done that. We've worked with the Cedar Lake Community Council. That's the oldest community council in the state of Montana. It's the first one. For several years on their regional land use plan, which of course is resource-based. Worked with Pyramid Mountain Lumber to get a CDBG loan to finance some of their high-tech equipment that created efficiencies for the mill. They were kind of like a lot of people from the old school, is you paid cash for stuff. And we convinced them that financing something over time would let them have cash to work with all the time. And so we were able to get that low interest loan for them. At the request of the Homeowners Association at the Double Arrow, we brought forth a plan to zone the Double Arrow to match their covenants, and found out their leadership didn't really talk to their people, and there was a lot of tar and feathers that night, and we did not zone.
Where's Double Arrow?
The Double Arrow is where the golf course is, and behind us, all those houses,
Oh, okay.
right there in Cedar Lake. Yeah, where the museum is. And when I went to high school up there, it was a working ranch. It was not a, didn't have 800 lots on it like it does now. We worked with the sewer board up there for many years, and we even loaned them our chief public works director for 7 years for $1 a year to help them be the project manager for that sewer system. They, we continue to work with them. Even when I'm done with this job, I'll be at their meetings until there is a toilet flushing going to the system. We have almost $17 million in grants and loans for the Sealy Lake community, and they have a new board for their sewer board. It's taken them a little while to get up to speed, but they did vote to go forward and have the plans drawn up to go to bid. So hopefully next year we'll break some ground. Work closely with a group called Sealy Lake Rocks. So that's, always have to think what it all stands for. Recreation, kinetic sports, it has a whole bunch of stuff. They mostly try to provide opportunities for kids to be, and adults to be involved with recreation, and they focus a lot on the Nordic ski trails. If you have never skied cross country up there, their ski trails were designed by an Olympian. And they room them, and they also, all the kids in the elementary school up there get to learn how to ski and speed skate, and some of that stuff, it's just part of their curriculum, which is great because a lot of those kids wouldn't have the opportunity. We also worked with them to change out their wood stoves for more efficient models. We've added a monitoring station and a readout board so Sealy Lake does not become a non-containment area. As you know, the Missoula Valley has been a non-containment area where we haven't, in 20 years, we haven't exceeded the numbers, but you're still on EPA's list, so we don't want Sealy to get on the list. Their historical museum, if you have never stopped, is wonderful. It is built from an old barn that was on the Double Arrow Ranch and moved there. Partnership Health Center contracts with the hospital board in Sealy Lake to provide the health care there in their clinic. We helped the Sealy Lake Fire Department purchase the old Plum Creek building, and Missoula County leases some office space there. That's where the deputies have an office, and our building codes has an office there and different things. We also helped Sealy Lake Search and Rescue build their own building so their rescue equipment is protected from the elements and ready to go when they're called. And thanks to all of you, there's a $500,000 that goes toward search and rescue, so some of it goes to Sealy Lake and most of it goes to Missoula. We've also helped facilitate the community's desire to have their speed zones changed through town and add a couple of crosswalks, so be careful because the speeds are slower and different than they used to be. And then we've done matching funds for that community playground that they have next to the school. In Swan Valley, we helped them to establish a fire service area because it was their volunteer fire department, but they didn't have any tax revenue, so they now have some tax revenue to help them. We also established a community council there. Several open space projects of protected wildlife habitat, corridors, fisheries, and open space. We worked with the folks that live around Lindbergh Lake to establish an RSID for their bridge maintenance. And their council is working on a land use plan up there. Clinton area, we have worked with the fire department and the community center and the school because they're kind of their organized areas, but they don't really want a lot more help. We also established a community council in Frenchtown called West Valley and one in the Evero area called Rural Finley O'Keefe. So there's been a lot that's happened since I took office. I have a couple months left. People have asked me what I'm doing. I said, well, they turned the squirrel cage up because it's on high right now, trying to finish up projects. 9/11 happened about 9 months after I took office. So that provided some opportunity for federal money for things like communication towers and equipment. Of course, we'd have rather not had money and not had that happen, but that's what happened. Hanging chads ended up with federal money for election equipment. That's aging and needs to be replaced. Courthouse remodel took us several years and 5 phases, included a new 911 center, an emergency operations center, new courtrooms, room for that 5th district court judge. We refurbished the old courthouse. The Paxson paintings were cleaned and have new lighting. And if you haven't driven by the courthouse lately to see the change to the doughboy, it's awesome. So it's now accessible. You can walk right up to the doughboy statue, or you can get to it in a wheelchair. Just a couple more things. The fairgrounds plan redevelopment. By next fair, the 2 big barns at the fairgrounds will be refurbished, have foundations. There'll be an elevator and or a lift, I guess you call it, and there will be new concession stands. All of that is being paid for with the 3 mills, the same 3 mills that we've allocated to the fair. It's just that you use those 3 mills to pay the debt service. The county extension office and the weed department will be meeting with the commissioners later this month to show us their plans, and we hope by 2020 that they actually have a building on the fairgrounds also. They have always been in different rented spaces. So a lot going on, a lot of things continue to need work. I just wanted to thank all of you for your work on the council, and for you have one of the best turnouts for your meetings, because you have interesting subjects. So that's great.
We have the most turmoil of any of the council meetings.
Oh, no, it takes
I
turns.
like the term interesting subject matter.
It's not a curse, may you live in interesting times.
There
But I
you
am working elections tomorrow at the University Center, so that means you show up at the university at 5:30, so I'm gonna go home and see if I can, turn off and go to sleep. So get up and...
Well, before you go,
Any questions?
Gene, I wanted to say personally, it's been a pleasure. Okay, not every time, but overall,
Feelings mutual.
Thank you. But thank you very much for your 16, 18 years of service.
Thanks.
We appreciate it.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And as a further announcement, following up on what Jane said, tomorrow is election day. If you have not voted and you're in this area, I'll be sitting at the room at the end of the hall waiting for you. Okay? As Gene gets there at 5:30, I don't have to be there till 6.
Don't chase everybody off.
Well, that'll encourage them to do mail-in ballots next time.
There's a mail-in.
Yeah. Another
I had
announcement?
one more thing.
Sure.
The street light at the end of 200 where it ends at First Street still
Yes.
isn't working, so I don't know if there's something.
We'll have a chance to really discuss that next week.
Okay.
I mean, next month, I'm sorry, next month.
Okay.
Okay, and we'll get to that in a few minutes.
Okay.
Any other announcements?
Announcements are just for things not on the agenda.
Either one. Most announcements
So I
are
would-
on the agenda.
I would ask the council to consider having the January meeting at the Hellgate Lions Barn. And the reason being that the church and Randy Hackner are pursuing the idea of a community center.
Okay.
And one proposed location for it would be the barn. So one thought was that if the community council would meet there, more people would get in touch with what the place was and what it was like, and maybe add some momentum to the evaluation of whether or not our community needed a community center. So it would be the January meeting, and then there's on January 10th, that group that's planning to evaluate the community center is meeting again. So I think that second Monday is right before that.
And January 10th, that meeting is at 5 p.m. It's a
Yeah.
Thursday.
Yeah.
So what's the second Monday in January? I thought you had your calendar.
Second Monday is the 14th.
No, so,
So it'd be
Yeah.
after that.
Yeah. but,
Any other discussion on that item? Would somebody like to move that we make the move from January meeting to the Hellgate Barn?
I would.
Okay, anybody want to second it?
I'll second it.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
hey, is that date January 14th? Okay.
January 14th. Okay. Any other announcements? No? And our only guest speaker tonight is Andrew. So I'm not sure Andrew needs a real introduction, but Andrew Hagemeyer from CAPS.
Hi, everyone.
And
I'm gonna hand out some
the rest
stuff.
does the council want to get up and go behind so we can see all the charts?
Yeah, why don't you?
Thanks.
So I'm here to present tonight on what we've been up to with the land use map. You've heard me time after time at these community council meetings give you a little updates, tell you where to go to look for information. We finally have a draft to show you. About half of you have actually seen this information already. You've come to one of the open houses, about half of you haven't. I was going to kind of walk you through what we presented at the open houses. And then I'm open for questions. And then I'm thinking this is all too small for everyone to read. So I'm thinking after we're done with the meeting, I'll stick around, and if people want to get up and look at the maps and the information, I'll stick around to answer questions or whatever. So over essentially the last year and a half, we've been working on updating the land use map for the area around, for Missoula County, for the area around the city. It's a really, really important policy document. You've heard me say this many times. It helps us guide where development's going to go over the course of the next 20 years. And that, by default, guides where we spend money to build infrastructure and where we spend money to deliver services. So in terms of how the county prioritizes huge parts of our budget, will have a big impact on that. So it's a really important document. Because it's important, it's really important that we base this land use map in what you want, the citizens of Missoula County. So we've done a ton of outreach. Just here in the Bonner, Milltown, West Riverside area, we've held a visioning session that happened in June, I think, of 2017. That sort of spelled out what you wanted the area to look like in the future in words, text. We held a workshop, a 2-hour-long workshop in March of 2018. We held an open house in June of 2018, and then we had an open house just last week out at the barn. So we've done quite a bit, and then probably a dozen times I've stood up here and said something, made some sort of announcement about the project at the community council meeting. So we've done a ton of outreach here. We've also had ways you could participate online. And it was important for me to tell you reiterate what you told us, so you know what people said. So there are a few things, before I get into exactly what you said, there were a few things that when we were studying this and we were doing research, that we realized that were just realities that we had to deal with. When we're developing the land use map, these were just realities that we have to accept and incorporate in our land use map. And I think it's important that everyone kind of knows what these realities are. The first is that this land use map was written in 1974. The county's population was about 58,000 people at that point in time. The most recent estimate says that Missoula County now has 117,000 people. So we've doubled in size. So we've got this land use map right now that's our policy for the future, written 40 years ago when we had half as many people. So it's time, it's well past due to update it. And we're going to continue to grow. We're estimating in Missoula County, so including the city, we're growing anywhere between 1,000 to 2,000 people per year right now. In this planning area, this area we're updating the map, we're expecting probably about another 14,000 people in the next 20 years. Don't all expect all of them here, you know, but somewhere in this area we're expecting about 14,000 people. I think a lot of that will probably happen on the edges, and the city will probably annex those spots as growth occurs, but there'll definitely be some development, some growth in this area. Part of that reason why is the geography. We have a pretty tight valley. It's why we're a non-containment area with the EPA. Pretty tight little valley. The mountains, the rivers, the hills, they kind of tell us where we can and we can't grow. Something we just have to accept. Those physical limitations. The third thing is, reality that we're facing is that growth and development requires infrastructure. As you guys have discussed, probably more than you really want to, is the need for sewer in the area. And that's a perfect example. Is the county doesn't really manage, plan for, or control much infrastructure in this planning area. We do a little bit of roads, we have a couple of small water systems, or a couple of small sewer systems that we manage, but we have not been very proactive in planning for infrastructure over the past 40 years. And then the final thing is that the price of housing, I think that's the last reality that we really need to face, has really, really increased over the past, just 5-6 years. So, based on those realities, what you guys said was what your values were that were important to you is housing was the first one that people really would like to see a range of housing types for all income levels. They don't want the Missoula area to become exclusive. They want their kids to be able to grow up here too. People really want to see development focused towards our existing infrastructure. It's a little bit of a challenge because we don't have a ton of it. People really want to see agricultural lands protected. That's both the large and small farms, the local agricultural that we have. I kind of lump this open space into one broad category, but it's more than open space. People really value wildlife, their wildlife habitat. They really value access for recreation and things like that. So I kind of lump that all into open space. People really value multimodal transportation. They value the mountain lane. I just saw that bus pull out and drop 2 people off right here where I was unloading my car. But it's not just mountain line, it's also the trails that you have. Gene just talked about trying to get that last connection between here and out by Marshall Canyon. And it's also roads and driving. People are concerned about congestion in other parts of town, not so much out here. Water quality is really important to everyone. And then finally, this was really one of the more important values for this area, is the unique community identity. I get a little hesitant saying Missoula when I'm talking about this mapping project, because you out here don't identify as Missoula. You might say you live in the Missoula area, but you don't identify as Missoula. Each neighborhood, East Missoula feels the same way. Each neighborhood within this planning area would like to keep that unique community identity that they have. So, based off these realities and these values, there's some certain strategies that we think we needed to employ in the land use map and developing that land use map, right? So we're calling them imperatives because they're really, really important, but they're strategies. first is to ensure the community's values are represented in the land use map. We want to make sure when you look at that map, when you look at these values, protect wildlife, protect open space, multimodal transportation, you can see it in the land use map. Provide for a variety of housing types. So one of the keys to affordable housing, to address affordable housing on the supply side, which is what we're dealing with the land use map, so this isn't about subsidies, it's about supply, is providing a range of housing types. Okay, so you have single family homes, you have duplexes, you have apartments. You need that whole range to be able to meet affordable housing needs. So we'd like to see a range of housing types represented on the land use map. We want to use the infrastructure we have in place today. We don't have a lot of infrastructure, but there are parts of the county, out specifically more towards the northwest of Missoula, where we do have sewer, water, and roads. We want to use that infrastructure we have in place today, maximize that. We also want to plan for places for infrastructure for tomorrow. So we do need to identify some places where we're going to want to plan for and then eventually build new infrastructure to accommodate growth. And finally, we really want to make sure that quality of life is represented in the land use map. You know, here in this area and in East Missoula, you guys actually have a lot of public lands and amenities right around here. And so those things that are important to people in terms of quality of life, the trails, the rivers and things like that are represented here. However, maybe you just don't have that last connection. That last, you know, that you have to cross private property to be able to access it. I know in West Riverside that's a problem. So things like that, making that last final connection in this area and in East Missoula, but then out at the Y, which is probably going to be a new neighborhood over the course of the next 20 years, we don't have anything out there right now. And so we want to make sure that as we go through and we identify where trails are or where open space might need to be, that we consider that in the future there's probably going to be a bunch of people out there. And so they need some of that stuff too. So they have a great place to live as well as you guys. All right, moving on. So basically what we did was we took all this information that we heard from you and we developed some land use designations. Now in the current land use map, the one that's in the books today, there are around 60 plus. I think it's 64 is the exact number. 64 land use designations. They're hyper-specific. And that map is a mess. And it is impossible to see what the community's vision. If you look at that, it's impossible to see what the community's vision is in that land use map. So what we've done is we've tried to consolidate that down from 64, we have 15 land use designations. They're very simple, the way they're organized. The land use designations, this text is really important. This is really, when it is adopted, this will be policy. This is policy framework. And each land use designation, they range from very little development to much higher development. They range from fairly natural resource based, residential, commercial to industrial based. Each land use designation has a description of the goal, its purpose over the long term. And this is supposed to be a visionary document, right? It's looking 20 years into the future. So the goal, what are we trying to achieve with this land use designation? There's a brief description, very general, about the land uses that would be appropriate for that land use designation. There's a little description about the character, what we want this place to feel like. There's a little bit of a description about the intensity. So especially in residential areas, that might mean dwelling units per acre. But in commercial areas, that might be square footage of the buildings. And then finally, there's a discussion about mobility and access. One thing that we didn't have in our land use designations in the past is that we didn't have that connection between what our transportation systems looked like and what our land use around it looked like, and vice versa, because what happens with development ends up affecting the transportation system, and what happens with that transportation system ends up making the development look a certain way. So it's really important. Planners are figuring this out all across the country. You need to talk about land use and what your transportation systems look like in general ways. You need to integrate that conversation. So we've started that in these land use designations. That helps address some of the things we've heard, integrating land use and mobility and access with this multimodal conversation. Because if we describe our transportation system that we desire in this area, when we go to build that transportation, we say we want this to be a walkable area, then we know when we build that transportation, we need sidewalks, we need crosswalks, we need those types of things. If anyone has any questions at this point, just, you know, I know you guys aren't shy about yelling out, so. So this is, I think, I just honed in, this is the land use map. So we developed these land use designations and then we drew a map. And I just focused in on Bonner, Milltown, and West Riverside area because I know you guys care the most about that, but I do have the entire planning area underneath this as well, so if people want to see that, I draw that. So we took that and we applied it, and there were a lot of considerations that went into the land map, and I have to peek because I can't remember all, but the values went into this that people had, transportation networks, the water systems, the sewer systems were things we considered, all of our all of the trends that we're seeing in land use development. So we did a big, you know, Steve helped out a lot with this. We talked about what are the trends in the built environment that we're seeing across the country, and are they present here? So, you know, we had a technical committee that helped us create this report called the Planning Area Profile. And we talked a lot about, like, what's the future of industrial lands? What's the future of commercial lands? So we really thought about that in our land use map as well. Population projections went into this, existing planned infrastructure, public services, like emergency services and school districts, the physical characteristics of the geography of the place, existing conditions like wildlife habitat and floodplains. We looked at all that. And then existing entitlements. So if people maybe had zoning and it said 1 dwelling unit per acre, we didn't want to affect their property rights. So we didn't want to take someone's zoning. If they had zoning that said 1 unit per acre, we didn't want to say agriculture, 1 unit per 40 acres. That would be affecting their property rights. So, and then finally, existing development patterns were things we would consider. So in this area, I don't think it's a big surprise that we have a big chunk of industrial lands where the current industrial parks are. You guys have said that you want that heritage, you want that industrial base here. That's not something you necessarily want to see go away. And then we have some lower density residential that, you know, out the 90 corridor that's pretty much what you got out there now. The more neighborhood residentials in these areas. You have some more intense commercial, that would be where the town pump is, no big surprise. And then you have some mixed use, kind of spotted in there as well. You guys really said you wanted to see some sort of town center be potentially possible, someday in the future. These pink areas, that's kind of what that's trying to do. It's a small scale commercial mixed use place. And then finally there's this purple. Now, this purple is what we're calling live make. Okay, so live make this concept came out of East Missoula. We did all the stuff we did with you, we did it in East Missoula too. And in East Missoula, they've got neighborhoods where they've got, you know, it's kind of their older neighborhood where there's all these small scale manufacturers, businesses kind of tucked in the neighborhood where people, it's, you know, they live in their house and they got their shop out back, and that's where they work. That's where they make their livelihood. And they didn't want to see that go away. And they're under a little bit different of a threat there because they could potentially be annexed in the next. I think it's by 2022. They have an agreement with the city of Missoula, and so they are worried that the city might annex them. And if they did, the city would apply the zoning without, you know, a lot of input on the local level. So they would like to zone it ahead of time before the city annexes it, because then what the city tries to do is they try to just copy the existing zoning as much as they can. So they thought it was, they came up with this idea to just live and make land use designation. It's a little bit different than residential and commercial. It's sort of a new trend in planning, and you see it applied in more urban places. We're going to try it in a little bit more rural place, so like East Missoula. And then, as we were going through the process, we were having some open houses here, and some people started saying, well, that came to open houses, said, well, if they're doing it in East Missoula, could we maybe do it in part of West Riverside? We think it might apply here as well. It's very similar. And I said, sure. I haven't broached the community with it yet, but we'll try. And so I went to the community council, and I can't remember the exact date, but I think it was this July. And we had, a fairly decent crowd, and I asked everybody about it. What do you think about this Live Make idea? And I had everybody write down a postcard or a little note card and then hand it back to me, so it wasn't like a vote. It was, you could be free with your comments, and almost all the comments were, there were a couple that were like, no, I don't know, but almost all the comments were, yeah, it's worth checking out, proceed, but be careful. It wasn't like a heck yeah, charge ahead. So what I did was I tried to be conservative in how I applied it in West Riverside. There is some industrial zoning in West Riverside right now, and so I applied the Live Make in it's like there's this industrial zoning in the middle of the neighborhood. It's really odd to see it there. I was actually surprised to see it. So I applied the Live Make there, where it's currently zoned industrial, and then the rest of the West Riverside area is pretty much, there's some residential zoning, but it's pretty much unzoned, and so I didn't have like a guide. And so what I did was I looked at the state's tax space to see if it was taxed as commercial, because I thought, well, maybe if someone has a business on the property, the DOR, Department of Revenue, would recognize that and they would tax it as a commercial. So that might be an indication to me. So here's where you got your industrial zoning, and then there was a group of commercially assessed properties over here. And so that's how I kind of came up with this. But you guys, I have to be honest with you, I'm not 100% confident on this. Like I'm 100% confident on this, right? That's obvious. But this is a little trickier, and we haven't had a ton of opportunity for the public to weigh in. So at the open house last week, we got a couple of people commented on the Live Make idea, and they said, probably be better if you just did that whole neighborhood Live Make. The land use densities are the same, so it wouldn't affect how many houses per acre or anything. But it would if it was ever to be zoned. I mean, a lot of this is unzoned, so you can do whatever you want kind of anyways, but if it was ever zoned, it would be zoned as Live Make, so it would be a little bit different than just a residential zone. So that's something that I really want you guys to think about. If anyone has any comments on that, jump in. But if I could get a little bit more feedback on that tonight, it could be later. Yeah.
So I guess the definition of what make would be,
it's on the back of your sheet is the land use designation for Live Make, because I knew there would be questions. Now remember, this is not zoning, so it is not specific. It is policy, so it is general. The devil would be in the details. If it ever was to be zoned, there would be a lot more detailed conversation. This is just setting that up with policy.
I was just going to say, I know that in the middle of that purple zone there is cabinet manufacturing that builds kitchen cabinets.
And I don't want to miss that stuff, but I also don't want to overreach and, as well. I mean, it's a tough one. In East Missoula, I sat in their community council meetings. I mean, this was their top priority. They didn't have other, fan noises and stuff like that going on in East Missoula. They just wanted to talk about the land use map. And so I sat at the meeting, and we actually, as a group of 20 or so people, drew the boundary together. So I had a good vetting group of people to vet that, but I haven't had a real good vetting on this yet. And so that's what I'm trying to get for you guys, is some better vetting on it.
When does this get to be permanent?
That's a great question. So right now, we're calling this a working draft, public's working draft. So the idea is we're going out to the public and we're vetting it with people. The next step is to take it to the planning board for a public hearing. So there would obviously, that would be a good chance to come up and say, I live at 123 Zag Avenue or Zag Lane, and I want this to be Live Make, to the planning board. But that's kind of intimidating to stand up in a public hearing setting. Some people are fine with it, others aren't. So it's much easier to do it in this Is that into that? So that's probably going to happen in January. So it's coming up, and then it's kind of more of an official document at that point. It's not so much of a public draft, it's more of a planning board. And then once the planning board gets through that, I don't know how long they're going to take on it. They might end up taking a while on it, they might just blow it right through, not sure. But after the planning board, there would be one hearing at least with county commissioners. And they're the final decision makers on this, so they would really be the ones that would, I think all the public comment is important, but that's, again, pretty intimidating to stand up in a public hearing and give public testimony.
All right, follow up on that.
Yeah,
Once the commissioners have done their thing and it becomes the new 1974 policy.
Yeah.
Okay? Is there a mechanism for coming in and saying, I'd like to change this?
yes. Yeah, so the county can, at any time, we can initiate a change. So there's two ways to change. There's the county way, when we see like we got something wrong, or we get different population projections in, or the city ends up extending sewer all the way out to Frenchtown or something, we can say, conditions have changed, we're gonna update the land use map. The other option is private landowners can come in and say, hey, conditions have changed, I would like to change the land use map. The bar is a little bit higher for the private citizens because they're asking to change county policy. But it's not, you know, it's not like a world record jump you have to make. It's a little bit higher, but it's not insurmountable.
Or if we had a group of people come to the council and the council went to the commissioners?
Yeah. But you have to remember that because it's the county policy, the commissioners have some discretion on whether they not want to consider it or not. So it's best to get it as close to right as we can now. Yeah. But if you guys, I mean, there's a possibility that, you know, in a year and a half, you guys come back and say, you know what, we really got this wrong. We'd like to change it. We've had conversations at community council meetings. This is what we'd like to see done. Commissioners could then direct the planning staff to update it again. Yeah.
So there will be a formal process, not 40 years till you do it again, right?
I certainly hope so. I think that was a mistake waiting that long. Yeah.
Is there a date? I mean, is there 5 years or 3
So
years?
technically, under state law, we're supposed to evaluate our growth policy every 5 years.
Okay.
And we don't have to update it, we just need to evaluate it to see if we need to update it. So hopefully every 5 years we'll be taking a little check. I think the first test will be when the next census comes out. Are our population estimates and projections correct? Because if we're shooting low, like if the actual population growth is lower than we've estimated and projected, that's okay. But if it's way higher than we projected, then it's a little bit panic time. And then we know, like, do we have enough commercial? Do we have enough industrial? Do we have enough residential? We're growing faster than we thought. We might need to update this. So that would be the first test, I think.
I noticed under the intensity, this level of density requires access to public sewer and water.
Yeah, so that's
If this was to go into place and somebody wanted to make an update to their house, and you don't have a business, how's that going to work with the city or county when you're trying to pull a permit?
Yeah, I think the way that's a really good point. So maybe the language should be reflected to May instead. I think that was really intended for the zoned areas. If people were changing their zoning, it was a symbol that to signalize, hey, we're not going to approve this zoning density if you don't have access to sewer and water.
I'm just trying to think how it would affect your permit.
And out here you don't have that, and so that might need to be rethought a little bit in its application here. So that's a good point. Yeah, a little bit lighter, fluffier language.
Lighter.
Would be appropriate. Yeah. Yeah.
So in the live-make designation, are there any kinds of criteria that would help people understand that this is not going to impact the quality of life? Are there noise limits or other kinds of impact limits that would let people know that we're not going to put in a big noisy thing here? This live-make means something with criteria that keep them.
Yeah. So the devil's in the details. With
Can
that.
you repeat the question?
Yeah, the question was, are there criteria to ensure that quality of life won't be affected with the live make designation? And at this point, there aren't, because it's policy. You know, it says within there that there should be those types of things put in place. And so when we develop, so out here, I mean, you're on zone for most part, and so it's like whatever, there are no criteria for anything. Just do whatever that you want. But if this was zoned, then we would have to develop a zoning district, and that has to be detailed. And that would have to have those parameters. And so it's really important that with live make, that it's small in scale. So I think having limits on building size would be one way. So there's not a 20,000 square foot building. 20,000 square foot building is big. That doesn't fit in with a residential neighborhood. But maybe 5,000 square feet is fine. So there might be limits on building size. So that would, in a building permit process, if you were building a new building, you'd have to keep it under a certain square footage. We would want to see, we wouldn't want to see a lot of, like someone with 20, the idea is that this is for entrepreneurs. You're getting a start in your backyard. The business starts taking off. You start to have a couple employees. Okay, that's okay. A couple employees. Okay, but then you start to get to 10 employees, 15 employees. No, it's time to go. You have to go find somewhere at the industrial park. You have to move on. Your business has outgrown this location. You're no longer small scale. So we would want to try to maybe see some sort of limitation on employees at the site. We want to make sure that the person residing, they actually reside there. So we don't want to say own, because we want renters to be able to have the same opportunity, right? But if we want to make sure that you're living, like the shops in your backyard, or maybe it's on the adjacent lot, but we don't want people that live in Fairview renting a shop down here, driving in every day and working. That's not, it's still supposed to be predominantly a residential place. So there's more pride in that business, right, if you live right outside the front door. And then we don't want to see retail. You know, we don't want to see cabinet makers having 30, 40 clients coming in every day to view their cabinets in their store, like a shop, like that type of thing. Like, you can sell stuff all you want online. You could have clients come in and do consultations or things like that, but we don't want you selling things off the property. If you want to sell it somewhere else, because we don't want to have a bunch of parking, that sort of issue. So I think most of that sort of it's indicated in there. If there are other general like sort of mitigation type ideas you want to see, let us know. And then we'll try to make sure that it's sort of ingrained in that policy level. But in terms of what the decibel level is or how many parking spots there should be, well, the idea is we say we want to make limitations. We say we want to mitigate the impacts on adjacent properties at the policy level, and then at the regulation level, that's when we get into that. How many parking spots do you need? How many square footage? Make sense?
Yeah.
Good.
Well, this is kind of related, but,
Yeah.
but what kind of, how enforceable, say this is a land use plan,
Yeah.
that's different than a zone. So that if somebody wants to do something and it's in contrast or conflicts with the land use plan, is that going to make a difference with whether that person is able to do it? Or does it require zoning before you can influence your land use plan?
The land use map, the land use plan is supposed to be policy. So if you're, the regulation, the zoning is really the regulatory tool. So it's not supposed to be regulatory, although there are some like little quasi-regulatory tweaks. Not tweaks, it's quasi-regulatory opportunities. So if you're doing a subdivision is the primary one. By law, this is something we look at. So if you're going to come in and it's up here and it's 1 dwelling unit per acre, and you come in and you propose 30 dwelling units per acre, we're going to say that's not in compliance with the growth policy. Now, the same side, straight up state law, it says you can't deny it based solely on compliance with the growth policy. There'd probably be other issues like traffic and wildlife and maybe get the ground so high on. But that's your only problem, you'd probably even stay up. Now, if it's unzoned and its land use designation is residential and someone wants to do a storage unit, there's no check. This doesn't really come into play.
So the only way to ensure that the community plan becomes reality is to have it zoned.
To implement it would be through zoning, and that was the next conversation I'll get to when we're done talking about this. Yeah. So that doesn't mean zoning's coming,
Yeah.
but if you really wanted to see it implemented, you would want to have zoning at the time. Like East Missoula, they really want to see zoning.
Well, if we do the zoning, then we're ahead of the city, and the city will more or less comply with that.
Yeah, I mean, so that's kind of how the city operates, is when they annex something, they look at what zoning, they either look at what the zoning already is and try to apply that same zoning, or they'll ask the landowner, do they want to see a more intense zoning that's in compliance with city documents. It's not, the city's not going to annex you. We had this conversation with the sewer thing, like, I just want to make that abundantly clear, they do not want you.
No, they don't.
So that's not to make that a motivation to zone, like fear of the city. Any other questions on this? Always come up to me afterwards as well. But I would like to hear more about the make. So finally is the implementation. So one of the things that we've heard throughout this whole process is that don't do this land use map and then not implement it. I mean, this land use map is policy, implement it. We want to see this policy come to fruition. So we identified some simple implementation strategies. We didn't get super detailed, but we have some concrete things. So first kind of category of implementation is code updates, because one of the primary ways to implement this map is through our codes, our regulations. So we have Missoula County zoning regulations. They were adopted first in 1976, so just a couple years after this was to implement this original map. So we need to update the zoning regulations. So an example is we have a definition for mausoleums, but we don't have a definition for brewery. That's an example of, like, I mean, how many mausoleums are there in Missoula? How many breweries are there? So we need to kind of get up to times, right? So the zoning regulations is one of the first things we're going to do. The county commissioners have already committed resources to that. The county should be hiring a consultant in the next few months to start that process of really getting in, doing an audit of our regulations, seeing where it needs to be updated, and then writing a code update for it. And there'll be a big public process for that. We'll probably see some of those people here. So the other thing we need to do is we need to take a look at our subdivision regulations, because this access and mobility piece that's in these land use designations, some of that can be implemented through our subdivision regulations. So when a subdivision occurs, we say in this land use designation, we want this type of infrastructure. So we need to put that standard into our subdivision regulations. So that's not that big of a project in terms of the zoning rewrites, big project. Subdivision regulation updates, that's an in-house thing. And the third piece of our code updates is to actually then go and update our zoning map. So our zoning map, by state law, has to, if you change your zoning, you or me, the county, changes zoning, we need to move towards compliance with this map. We need to make that zoning look more like this map. It doesn't have to be 100%, but we can't move away from it, right? It has to move toward it. So what we would like to do is identify areas where we should pursue, the county should pursue proactively rezoning places. And this is probably going to affect areas where we have infrastructure in place today, like out on Mullen Road and out on I-90, where there is sewer, water, and roads in place, where our zoning, our our land use designations are suggesting higher densities than what our zoning currently allows. To proactively rezone that takes a huge risk off the plate of developers. They could come in and get housing built quicker, faster, cheaper, benefits the whole community. So we want to look at places to do that. There's also the potential that we would look at zoning on zoned areas. Now, there hasn't been any sort of commitment to where or what or even if that will happen, but that definitely needs to be on the table to potentially zone unzoned areas. So if that occurs, you guys would be well aware if they were going to zone unzoned parts of this area. I don't know if that would be a priority or not, but that needs to be put out there, that potentially we would zone unzoned areas. Management. So next up is infrastructure. Infrastructure is a really important piece to implementing plans. Now, we have some places where we have the infrastructure in place to handle the development that we today, that we projected in the land use map. Over time, it's questionable. Our numbers are kind of indicating that we won't even be able to accommodate all the housing we're going to see over the next 20 years in those places. We are going to have to find new places to have infrastructure. So we need to create a little bit better framework of facilitating growth and investment. And what that means is the county needs to be more proactive in planning for, developing, and managing infrastructure. And that's primarily water and sewer, a little bit roads. The county already manages roads, but there's also the highway department that manages roads, or also the city that manages roads. So water and sewer are really, as you guys know, are really the things that allow you to get over basically 2 dwelling units. You can't really develop that dense without water. So we don't know what those tools are, what the financing mechanisms are, but we just know that as a policy, we need to start to be more proactive. And this is really in there to let, we don't have to start building sewer and water lines tomorrow. What we need to do tomorrow is to start to plan where we might do that and how we do it. One option is grant funding. Gene mentioned that there's $17 million, $18 million, is it $17 million in City Lake with the grant funding for their sewer system. I can't remember the exact numbers, but I think the sewer system, the PER that you guys did was around 22 million, something like that. I mean, that would be a funding gap of just $4 million. So, not saying anything about sewer here, but I'm just an example, like grant funding can be a huge thing. Right now, the county has an application in with the federal highway department to build a road grid west of Reserve, between the airport and Reserve. And so a road grid between Mullen and Broadway. It's another example of using grant funding and being more proactive with our infrastructure. That would alleviate a lot of traffic off of Reserve to build a road grid in there, road network, off that North Reserve area. It would allow a lot of growth to happen in a place where it really makes sense to have higher densities. We want to align, we are hoping that this map will help align county expenditures with where growth is going to occur. So, hey, let's say we've got $1 million to build a trail, and we know we're going to be seeing a ton of development out of the Y. Well, maybe we should use part of that $1 million to build a trail out to the Y, because there's going to be a lot of people out there in the future. That kind of thing. And finally, there's the ability to use tax increment financing, maximizing that. Tax increments financing in the county can only be used on industrial areas. It's got a TIF district right across the street. You guys know about that. I've heard a lot about that. But all this industrial land out by the Y doesn't have a TIF district. We're not utilizing that to the highest capacity. TIF district out there, we could really take more advantage of that industrial land that we already have. Maximize that. Base. It can be used to extend infrastructure, so it's a possible way to get infrastructure built. Finally, coordination is going to be a big part of this implementation strategy. A lot of the growth that we're going to see over the next 20 years isn't probably going to be happening so much in Bonner and West Riverside and Milltown. It's going to be happening right on the edge of the city. It's probably going to be happening in areas that are now in the county, but when it will be annexed when it gets there. That's where we're probably going to see most of the growth and development, probably to the northwest of the zone. So, a couple ideas that we've worked out, that we've talked about with the city, and we've gotten a lot of traction on, is to improving our coordination. We do a lot of coordination now, but always room for improvement. Is some joint master planning. I think that area, especially out by the airport, where we're talking about that road grid between Mullen and Broadway and west of Reserve, that could, and a joint master planning project between the city and the county and partners and landowners. We could really we put our heads together and plan that right. We could really make a great neighborhood out there in the future that's really livable and meets a lot of our housing needs. And so that would be a perfect example of the city and the county working together to plan some areas. This city and county have what's called an Urban Growth Commission. They don't meet terribly often, but we think that they maybe should meet more often to have discussions about how the city and county are working together on planning issues in this area in a public forum, so the public's aware and can participate in those conversations. And then finally, we're suggesting that the city and county develop a memorandum of understanding. These are non-binding agreements that that jurisdictions make from time to time. We think we should make one that identifies what the city and the county have in common in this area, where the city and county are kind of planning for growth to occur. If we identify what we have, what we share in common, what our values are, what our objectives are, it'll be a lot easier for us to plan our infrastructure standards, to make things happen in a way that makes sense, basically. So that's it. That's the whole kit and caboodle. Yes, Steve.
So, in one of your implementation strategies, you talk about sewer and water. Do you think the commissioners, do they have the will to maybe get started on that for this area?
So, for this area in particular, I think there was at the higher levels, there was sort of this idea that the sewer and water discussion died here about 1.5 years ago. And that's not my take. My take is, and this is coming from you guys, is that we're just not going to continue the discussion right now, but it can definitely start up again in the future. And so that's one thing that I've communicated to them. To like, no, it's not dead. It's just taking a break. They don't want to talk about it for a little while. Tell me if that's proper.
No, that's right. As far as I know, that's right. And something has not been finalized yet. WGN Engineering has come to me with thoughts on a better, cheaper way to do wastewater treatment. And they want to make a presentation out here. So that'll probably be in January or February. So the conversation is not totally dead.
Yeah, I think maybe it's the mechanism. Like maybe we're not going to do a big central system for this whole area, but maybe a package system that can be expanded over time, and people can come in, and it can be more incremental. And I could kind of see that happen.
My point would be that I think it's going to take some leadership from the county. I don't think this group of individuals can start to push it, because then it just gets shot down too easily. I think it's critical, and I think you're right. I think there is interest. It's just grant funding, all those kinds of things have to kind of come together to make it realistic, and all kinds of different creative ways to go about it. I think there's lots of ways.
I think the community needs to start the conversation. I think you're right. I think the county commissioners should take more of a leadership role in it. That's why we make it a big implementation piece. We're trying to communicate to our elected officials that, hey guys, we need to be more proactive. You need to be directing the Public Works Department to plan for these things. So, but in terms of what might happen here, I think the commissioner shouldn't come in and say, let's start that conversation again. I think you guys need to be like, let's start the conversation again, and then invite the commissioners in.
So I'm pretty sure that what happened was that most of us realized that we needed sewer. Period. We also realized we couldn't afford it at the numbers we're getting. So, but none of that included any grant. So I think people just, and in my, used to be private but now public opinion, and there was not a good evaluation process of what people really wanted to take in a way that they might be able to afford. As soon as they found out it was $70 per month, they said, heck no. And so there was never an opportunity to really address a realistic level of funding to make it happen. But I think everybody that I know, we've had several meetings talking about the need for sewer. We all know we need it, but we just don't want to pay $70 a month.
Yeah, and that engineering report that came out didn't look at the cost of not doing sewer.
Right.
Because there's a huge cost of not doing sewer. Like that's gonna cost, like when your septic system goes, that's $15,000, and that's coming out of your pocket. There's no grants. So there's a huge cost to it, and it didn't incorporate any other funding mechanisms. It just said this is going to cost $22 million. $22 million divided by the number of households is $70 a month.
So in my opinion, it got partly done, but it didn't really get completed. They stopped the process before it reached a satisfactory end that said yes or no.
Yeah, and I agree with that. We stopped that conversation, but the discussion is still, the question is still hasn't been answered.
Unanswered.
Yeah.
All right. Any other questions? Conversation, Tom? We can get the council back up front, please.
Yes, thank you.
All right, Andrew, thanks so much. Now we have bouquet period. Anybody got a bouquet? No?
I talk all the time, and so I was trying to get her to talk. But, anyway, we have a bouquet to offer for Randy Hafner and our Savior Lutheran and Miscellaneous Idea Community Center. And they're approaching it, as far as I'm concerned, the right way, evaluating the need, and then moving forward and keeping it going. So thanks to those guys for
Good one. Yes, ma'am.
And like always, everybody's always looking for input, ideas from people, so they're asking for ideas, so to have one, share it, please.
Okay. Any other bouquets? No. Public comment on anything? And I've got two that I should have set up in the announcements. One, the young lady that we offered the job to take notes, got a full-time job that she doesn't get off till 7 o'clock at night, so she had to turn me down. She accepted, and 2 days later called me back and said, sorry. So we're still looking for a note taker. Okay? And the other thing is the Kettle House tap room here is open as of Friday, this past Friday. And
They're having a,
grand opening is this next Friday. Yes. So the tap room is a really neat place. You ought to go take a look at it and buy a beer, you know. But and I'm not pushing Kettle House, but the wood in the tap room came out of the river. Okay, and they've done some really marvelous things with it. A lot of the metal in there, and I think it's still being fabricated, that the footrail for the bar is from rebar that came out of the river. It's they've done a lot with it to make it part of the environment. Okay? But it doesn't look like it came out of the river. It's really good looking stuff.
What's the capacity of the tap?
I don't know.
I heard it's really small.
Oh, you could have a couple hundred people in there.
It's fairly
Yeah,
small,
it's-
but yeah, you could probably have.
It's not small.
Yeah,
It's not
no, it's
tiny.
as big as this room.
So if you turn in Cold Home Drive and just.
You'll see the neon sign down there
Oh,
beckoning
oh.
you towards the door.
And interestingly enough, if you go in the afternoons when the canning line is running, they've got a section, a bar along the wall with chairs and stuff where you can watch the canning line run.
Oh, wow.
And that's an interesting mechanism. It really is. So those are the two things I wanted to throw in that I forgot earlier.
If you bring your binoculars, you can also watch for deer on the hill.
And mountain goats. And mountain goats, right.
Sheep.
Oh, no, sheep,
Bighorn.
mountain sheep. Okay.
It's
Much
okay.
can. They tried to put goats up there, but.
All right, next is communications, and we're getting on down to the bottom here. So, the Montana State Parks news release, and I put some out on the chairs here. I think they're on Chuck's hat now, okay? So, okay, there's some out, and I'll put it out in an email this week. But the Bonner Learning Park has got public comment open for the proposal of it being part of the Milltown State Park. So if you have comments or thoughts along that line, let them know. If you get one of these sheets, the contact names are on the back. So that's that one. And treasurer's report.
Yes, we have $1,096.62 in our bank account. And I need to cut a check as a reimbursement to Don
Right.
today, which will decrease that number by about $17.
And there's the receipt.
Thanks.
Action items, we don't have any. The council will take note of any available updates for our following areas of interest, and that's the community center that we've already talked about, okay? Any more fans gone in?
I can't,
No? Don't know?
I don't know.
Okay, just curious. It's no longer an issue. Thank you very much. The next meeting has been corrected to December the 10th, same place, same time. And the agenda for that meeting should be interesting. It is to discuss Highway 200 concerns. And I've got confirmation from Shane Stack from the Montana Department of Transportation, Sheriff McDermott, Nick Chakota, Tim O'Leary with Kettle House, and Steve Nelson with Bonner Properties. So I suspect that what we'll have is a panel discussion and open for questions. So beyond that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
I have one.
Oh, you have a quick question?
Yeah.
You're too slow.
You're welcome.
Now I see where they're working on finishing the road where you can access on either side of the park. Is that open to the public? I mean, they've got it pretty well graded in. Are the plans are to pave it this year?
I don't know where you're talking about.
That's a
Train
trail
by
down
the
there.
Black Bridge over to the,
The state park.
That Lawson Trail.
I don't know.
I wondered that myself. Not open.
They can't open it until they finish the second bridge. There's
so
gonna be-
are
so-
they gonna put signs up to keep people walking on it now, or no? Or just gonna follow through?
That's probably a really good point to bring up, actually, Elaine, because people don't know that.
No, because there's people walking on it.
Yeah, so that's.
You're talking the
It's
west
really
side between
convenient.
the bridges?
Park.
Yeah.
On the west side of the river?
Yes, yeah.
The railroad bridge, I kind of getting the rough grade in for it. It's not ready for use yet.
It won't be until after the second bridge is built next summer. So it's a long time away.
So it'll be
Yeah,
at least
but
a year from now.
They're working on it right now, and they have it graded in.
Yeah.
Are they gonna put up barricades?
And that's what, that's a good idea. Chuck's in charge of that.
Yeah.
I don't know. They haven't, you know,
They didn't ask me.
They didn't ask me whether.
You know,
I
somebody's
wanted to
gonna
run.
try walking through there anyway, so.
But that's a park, that's kind of an important state park.
And-
That's true, but if you got a barricade, you've got some liability issues
Yeah, you gotta
taken care of.
One other little question, since we're kind of down in that park area. You know, where the old road that used to go to the dam goes under that little viaduct,
Right?
why don't they put in a walking gate so you don't have to walk up that rocky slope?
Ask Chuck.
Chuck.
I'll forward that on to
He's
the
in charge
boss.
of that.
And the bolts that are sticking out have been
Yeah, those look like
taken
real ankle grabbers. I was always curious why they put the handicap parking clear at the far side of the park from everything. They came in a week or so ago and put in a handicap ramp right there by the signs.
Yeah.
That's good.
We walk it almost every day.
That's
I
good,
mean,
though.
and they've done some awesome work with the trees and everything, but some of the access just doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
That's it.
That's it.
Okay, Callie, now.
Are you sure? Any other last questions?
Quick, Kevin.
I move to adjourn.
And a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Thanks, everybody, for coming. Hope to see you again next week.
Are we buying Don beans?
Oh, no, no, no. It's just a
So you
one.
don't have to put the things in there.
Just the one.